All right, we're going to start our cardiovascular system lecture. This lecture is going to cover the anatomy of the heart. It's going to cover the path that blood takes through the heart and then around the body and back to the heart. And then we're going to talk a little bit about impacts on the cardiovascular system. The main impacts on the cardiovascular system that we're going to discuss are blood pressure, blood volume, resistance, and then the impact that exercise has on the cardiovascular system. A quick review of our virtual lecture norms. Make sure you are taking notes in your written notebooks. You're going to upload these notes to OneNote. Make sure you have your cell phone away, just like in class. Be sure to pause and rewind whenever necessary, and then make notes also of questions about the material that you don't understand. You can ask me these questions in the next class, virtual office hours, or simply through an EDSB message to me. As we take a look at the heart, again, we're going to talk about not just the cardiovascular system, but the entire circulatory system, and really those terms are synonymous with one another. The circulatory system is talking specifically about the blood vessels, the veins, and the arteries that are going to be supplying the heart and supplying the rest of the body with blood. All right, so there's going to be two types. First type is going to be a vein. So our two types are veins and arteries. Veins are going to bring blood towards the heart. Arteries are going to take blood away from the heart. And you'll notice in diagrams that we're going to use the red color for blood that's considered to be oxygenated blood. We're going to use the blue color for blood that is returning to the heart after it's traveled around the body and it's delivered oxygen to the tissues around the body. Inside the body, the blood is always some form of red, either a scarlet red or a little lighter red if it's exposed outside of the body. But that is what we're going to use just for the sake of diagramming the path of blood around the body. An easy way to remember this is that vein has an IN in it, obviously. So we're going to be bringing blood in to the heart, and then artery, the first letter is an A. So we can think that we're taking blood away from the heart with an artery. Another key term that I would like you to understand here is the word pulmonary. And pulmonary is synonymous with lung. All right, so not all arteries that take blood away from the heart are going to be necessarily completely deoxygenated, but do understand again, arteries are taking blood away, veins are bringing blood in, and then pulmonary stands for lung, and I'll get into the importance of that here shortly. All right, so as you can see, I've labeled the heart. One thing that we need to think of in terms of the different sides of the heart, so we're going to have a right side and a left side, and you're always going to use the perspective of the patient. Okay, so if it would be as the patient stands, would be the opposite of what you're looking at when you're looking at the patient. So the right side, the right atrium is going to be on their right side. All right, so we're going to start with A and B here on my picture, and these are two large veins that are going to be returning to the heart. We have A is the superior vena cava, so make sure that you're getting these down, get the correct spelling down. The superior vena cava, and then the inferior vena cava. So these are two large veins that both are going to feed deoxygenated blood to the heart. I want you to take a moment, pause the video, and write down why is this blood that is coming into the heart via the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava deoxygenated. So the main reason that this blood that is being returned to the heart is deoxygenated is because it's traveled all around the body and provided oxygen to all of the tissues of the body, and then it has to come back to the heart, where it will then be pumped to the lungs to be reoxygenated. All right, so as the blood returns here, and again, so now we're going to be going in order of the flow of blood through the heart. So the first part is the vena cava, the superior vena cava, which is coming from the top half of the body, and then the inferior vena cava, which is bringing the blood from the bottom half of the body. It's going to come into this atrium right here. You can think of an atrium like a gathering place, like at the beginning, at the start of a church or a building that you walk in. There might be a large atrium that you might walk into. That's what the right atrium is like. So this is the first gathering place. Okay, and if we think of the heart, we can really break it down into four main chambers. The top chambers being the atria, or the atriums, okay? And then the bottom chambers are the ventricles. And the ventricles, as you can see from my picture here, the ventricles have a much thicker muscular wall as opposed to the atriums here at the top, okay? That is because that's where the muscle contraction is going to take place, and that is where we're going to see muscle contraction force the blood out of the heart to wherever it's destined to go at that point. Okay. All right, so we've got our superior vena cava, our inferior vena cava, and we have our right atrium, and then we're going to have another door here, or actually the first door that we arrive in, and this is what we call a valve. All right, these are valves, V-A-L-V-E. So these valves are doors that open in one direction. So kind of think of like a double-sided door that you might have at school that's going to open in just one direction, okay? It prevents blood from flowing backwards, because if the blood flows backwards, we could have a blood clot because of the blood just sitting and pooling. So these valves have to open in one direction. This first valve here between the right atrium and the right ventricle is going to be what we call the tricuspid valve. The job of this valve, again, is just that door, that gate, to open between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So letter E is going to represent the right ventricle. And remember, we're going in order of the path of blood through the heart. So this is the right ventricle. We already talked about how the lining of the wall is thicker in the right ventricle. All right, so right now I'd like you to think about where would the pressure be the highest? Would it be higher in an atrium or in a ventricle? So now we're going to run into another valve. This is going to be letter F, okay, and this is going to be a valve that is going to open up to the first artery that we run into. So remember, arteries take blood away from the heart. So this is going to be the pulmonary valve. And I want you to, again, review that the idea or the word pulmonary means lung. So this valve is going to open up and it's going to pump blood to the lungs. All right, and then letter G up here is going to be my pulmonary artery, which simply takes blood to the lungs so that it can be oxygenated. All right, so again, to recap, on the right side of the heart, and again, we're looking at the perspective of the patient, we first have blood that returns to the heart after going around the body and oxygenating all the tissues. It's going to come from the top half of the heart through the superior vena cava, and through the bottom half, from the top half of the body through the superior vena cava, and then through the bottom half of the body, waist down, through the inferior vena cava, into the right atrium. The tricuspid valve is going to open in one direction, passes the blood down to the right ventricle, letter E there, and then it's going to get, when the ventricle, the bottom part of the heart contracts, it's going to push blood and open up the pulmonary valve, which is going to send the blood to the pulmonary artery, and now the blood is traveling into the lungs. All right, the lungs have a high concentration of oxygen. This blood that's just traveled all around the heart has a low concentration of oxygen. So we're going to review now the idea of diffusion from earlier in the year. So we've gone through the process of oxygenating the blood in the lungs, and now we're going to begin to return back to the heart, okay? And again, we're following the path of blood to the heart. So as the blood becomes oxygenated, the diagram, in my diagram here, I show you that we're looking at a red color. All right, so H, these are going to be the veins, right? Remember, vein means that we're bringing blood into the heart. So this is going to be letter H right here. Those are going to be the pulmonary veins. And then we're going to have, let's go ahead and label these and I'll write them out for you. Then we have our atrium. Remember, the atrium is the gathering place, okay? And this is going to be now the left atrium. We have a valve here. This is going to be J for this valve that lends us down into the left ventricle. All right. And then we have another valve, the aortic valve, right here. And this aortic valve is going to be opening up and sending the blood into the thickest, strongest artery in the body, and that's going to be the aorta. All right, and that's where pressure is going to be very high as the blood is then going to be expelled to the rest of the body to go around now and reoxygenate things. So H, again, my pulmonary veins. They are veins plural because there are multiple pulmonary veins that come into the left atrium there. Then we have our left atrium, I. The blood is going to gather there, move quickly through the mitral valve, and then down into the left ventricle. And from there, we're going to go through the aortic valve and to the aorta before the blood is then sent all over the body at that part. And again, I said the aorta is going to be considered the thickest vessel in the body because this is where the pressure is the highest. As we continue on, we'll see that one of the main principles that we need to know for our biology EOC for the heart are the effects of or the factors that affect blood flow through the cardiovascular system. So unless this is the 2020 e-learning version, if this is our regular version of class, then you're going to want to make sure that you know these for the EOC. If it's the e-learning version, you just need to learn them for the rest of this year here. And these are all concepts that you'll take with you to junior year HL and SL biology. All right, so first of all, when we're talking about blood flow, all right, I want you to relate it to the idea of a garden hose, right? So obviously if I turn the knob on the garden hose so that the valve is more open, then we're going to have a higher pressure of water in the garden hose. All right, so what I want you to be thinking about, there are going to be two things that are going to have a real impact on this. The first thing in the blood vessel is going to be how constricted is the blood vessel. All right, this is going to have a direct impact on the pressure and then also the viscosity of the blood, or how thick the blood is. So the first factor that's going to affect blood flow in the cardiovascular system is blood pressure. All right, and that very simply, make sure you get this definition down, is the pressure that drives blood to the body, the organs, and tissue through blood vessels. The first type of blood vessels that we talked about were the veins, right, which brings the blood in, and then the arteries, which takes the blood out, and then also capillaries, which are tiny vessels. All right, and that is where the diffusion of oxygen is going to take place in the lungs in something called a capillary bed, where the blood actually goes into the capillary bed, sits there, oxygen then diffuses from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. I'm sure many of you have had your blood pressure taken, some of you for the heart lab, for the heart rate lab, where you're trying to identify a factor that might increase the heart rate or decrease the heart rate. Some of you may have chosen to do blood pressure. You could test the blood pressure of somebody and see if maybe watching a scary movie or doing some push-ups or sit-ups would increase their blood pressure. Well, when you take the blood pressure, there are two numbers that we're going to be checking. All right, it's a number over another number. The top number is called the systolic blood pressure. All right, and then the bottom number is the diastolic blood pressure. And these two pressures work together to give a medical expert the idea of just a way to gauge cardiovascular health. All right, so blood pressure is going to be measured in millimeters of mercury, and ideally we're looking for the systolic pressure to be 120 millimeters of mercury or less. This is the pressure of the blood as it is ejected from the heart. So let's go back and review which artery is the artery that is responsible for housing the blood as it is ejected from the heart. The bottom number is the diastolic blood pressure, and that's going to be the pressure of the blood as it returns to the heart. Okay, and this is going to be between 75 and 80 millimeters of mercury or less is our target. All right, once we get above 80 here and get above 120, we're going to see what is called hypertension, which is a blood pressure that is too high. And then on the other side, we could have blood pressure that is too low. There might be some form of a circulation problem, or that's the sign of congestive heart failure or an aging heart, and that would be hypotension, where the blood pressure is in fact too low. Hypotension. So just like with our garden hose, the pressure at which we turn the hose on for the water is going to obviously impact the amount of water that's going to come out of the end of the hose. Just like with the heart, the pressure of the blood as it is ejected from the heart is going to impact how that blood travels around the heart. Volume is the same. All right, volume is going to have an impact, and every human has on average 5 liters of blood circulating through their body at any given time. So it's important for us to remember that blood volume will impact blood flow, okay, and that blood pressure, or BP, is going to also impact the blood volume. All right, next, the amount of resistance. All right, if you take that garden hose and you squeeze it, that's going to cause resistance. Or if you've ever had what we call a kink in a garden hose, that's going to prevent the water from flowing evenly through the garden hose. Same thing with resistance and heart disease. And there's going to be a few different types here that we're going to look at. The first one is going to be called atherosclerosis. The second one, arteriosclerosis. And then we're going to talk about blood clots. These are all things that are going to have an impact on blood flow through the body and subsequently through the heart. So atherosclerosis is going to be simply the buildup of plaque. All right, and when we say plaque, we're talking about 3 things. We're talking about lipid or fat, cholesterol, and triglycerides. Triglycerides, if you remember back to the macromolecule part of the school year, we were talking about triglycerides, which are the building blocks of lipids and cholesterol. So it's the buildup of plaque in a vessel that fuels the heart. And these vessels are called the coronary arteries, which are specifically, these are the arteries that are going to feed blood directly into the heart. So if there's a heart attack type situation, that's going to be because there's a buildup of plaque. One of the reasons is because there'd be a buildup of plaque in the actual vessel. All right, so that's an important part to understand. Let me draw this would be let's call this a cross section of a coronary artery that's feeding blood to the heart. Okay, and if we have a buildup of plaque, all right, so we have these fatty acids, our saturated fatty acids. Remember we talked about unsaturated fatty acids, which were the worst because they're thicker, they have all these bends in them. That's going to all cause a eventual blockage. That's going to cause reduced blood flow to the heart, which then causes the heart attack situation. So that's atherosclerosis. It's the blockage actually within the coronary artery itself. All right, and then our second type, arteriosclerosis. This is when the artery is actually going to have a thickening within the wall itself. All right, so you can see in my picture there, we have a thickening in that wall. That's going to cause an increase in resistance. Okay, so for all of these, if we increase resistance, that is going to cause a decrease in blood flow. Okay, increase in resistance causes a decrease in blood flow. Blood clots, lastly, okay, are going to be something that can cause stroke. All right, so this is going to be when blood clots, and then it will reduce blood flow to the brain. Lastly, obviously, the idea of exercise is going to be important because it's going to work the heart just like any other muscle. Just like you would try to strengthen any other muscle, all right, you want to always be working to strengthen your heart. So this is an overview of the path of blood through the heart, an overview of the anatomy of the heart, and then an overview of the impacts on the cardiovascular system. Specifically, what are the impacts that impact the flow of blood to the heart?